They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that money is thicker than both. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I became, what I lost, and what I was willing to destroy to get it back. This is the story of how I went to war with my own daughter over a family fortune, and why I'm telling you this now, sitting in this empty house with nothing but the echoes of my own voice and the weight of what I've done. If you're settling in to hear this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of what comes next, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you think about family, about loyalty, and about how far a mother will go when pushed to the absolute edge. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. 28 years ago, I married into the Whitmore family. Richard Whitmore, tall, distinguished, with silver at his temples even then, and a voice that could command a boardroom or charm a charity gala. He was everything I thought I wanted, successful, established, respected. His textile empire stretched across 3 states, and when he looked at me with those steel-grey eyes and told me I was going to be his wife, I felt like Cinderella finally getting her prince, but fairy tales don't prepare you for the reality of marrying into old money. Richard's family had been wealthy for generations, the kind of wealth that came with rules, expectations, and a hierarchy I was never truly allowed to climb. His mother, Catherine Whitmore, made it clear from our engagement party that I was an outsider who had somehow managed to trick her precious son into marriage. She would introduce me at social functions with a smile that never reached her eyes, saying things like, "This is Richard's wife. She comes from such humble beginnings." The pause before humble was always just long, enough to let everyone know exactly what she thought of me. The eye. First few years of marriage were a careful dance of pretending everything was perfect. Richard would leave for the office at 7 sharp every morning, kissing my cheek with the same mechanical precision he used to straighten his tie. I would spend my days in our enormous house, 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a kitchen bigger than the apartment I grew up in, feeling like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The staff knew I didn't belong. They would smile politely and say, "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore," while their eyes said something entirely different. When Sarah was born, I thought things might change. Surely now, with a grandchild, Catherine would soften toward me. But even motherhood became another arena for judgment. I held Sarah wrong, fed her wrong, dressed her wrong. Catherine would sweep into our home with bags from the most expensive children's boutiques, replacing everything I had carefully chosen with items that met her standards. "Oh, Margaret," she would say, holding up a simple cotton dress I had bought. "We simply can't have the Whitmore heir dressed like this." Sarah grew up beautiful, brilliant, and completely unaware of how much her grandmother despised me. To her, I was just Mum, the woman who packed her lunches, helped with homework, and attended every soccer game and piano recital. But I could see Catherine's influence growing stronger each year. Sarah would come home from weekend visits to her grandmother's estate with new clothes, new opinions, and a subtle shift in the way she looked at me. Richard was either oblivious or simply chose to ignore the undercurrents in our family. His focus was entirely on the business, on maintaining the Whitmore legacy, on ensuring that the family name continued to mean something in the circles that mattered to him. He provided for us handsomely, I'll give him that. I never wanted for anything material, but emotional support, understanding, partnership, those were luxuries he didn't seem to think I deserved. By the time Sarah graduated from college, Harvard, naturally following in her father's footsteps, I had perfected the art of invisible suffering. I smiled at charity luncheons, played the perfect hostess at Richard's business dinners, and never let anyone see the cracks that were spreading through the foundation of my carefully constructed life. I thought I was playing the long game, that patience would eventually pay off. I thought that when Richard's mother finally passed away, when the business was secure, when Sarah settled down and gave us grandchildren, I would finally find my place in this family. How spectacularly wrong I was. Richard's heart attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 59 years old, standing in our kitchen, drinking his usual black coffee and reviewing the morning's financial reports when he simply collapsed. I found him there 20 minutes later, papers scattered around him like fallen leaves, his reading glasses still perched on his nose. The paramedics said he was likely dead before he hit the floor. The funeral was a grand affair, exactly what Richard would have wanted. The church was packed with business associates, politicians, country club members and social climbers who hadn't spoken to Richard in years, but wanted to be seen at his service. I sat in the front pew wearing a black Armani dress that Catherine had selected, playing the grieving widow while inside I felt nothing. Not grief, not loss, just a strange emptiness, as if the last 28 years had been a movie I'd watched rather than a life I'd lived. But the real performance began at the reading of Richard's will. I sat in the mahogany-panelled office of Morrison, Burke and Associates, surrounded by the same leather-bound law books that had witnessed countless family fortunes change hands. James Morrison, Richard's attorney for over 2 decades, cleared his throat and began reading in the same measured tones he might use to recite a shopping list. The house, the cars, the investment accounts, all left to Sarah. The business, valued at over $40 million, left to Sarah. The family trust, established by Richard's grandfather and worth another $30 million, left to Sarah. For me, the devoted wife of 28 years, there was a monthly stipend of $5,000 and the right to live in the guest house on the estate property, the same guest house, where Catherine had once suggested I might be more comfortable. Remember the sound of my own breathing in that silent room, the way the afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows, the smell of old leather and furniture polish. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with tears. "Mom, don't worry," she said. "We'll figure this out together. The money doesn't matter, but it did matter. It mattered because it represented every slight, every dismissal, every moment I had been made to feel like an outsider in my own family. It mattered because Richard had just delivered his final judgment on our marriage from beyond the grave, and that judgment was that I was worth exactly $5,000 a month, less than he spent on wine in a good year. The months that followed were a masterclass in humiliation. Sarah, to her credit, tried to maintain some semblance of normal family relations. She invited me to dinner, included me in holiday plans, and even suggested I might want to help her learn about managing the various businesses and investments. But I could see the change in how people treated me. The country club staff who had once rushed to accommodate Mrs. Richard Whitmore now treated me with polite indifference. The wives of Richard's business partners, women who had once competed for invitations to my dinner parties, suddenly found themselves too busy to return my calls. The guest house, my new home, was comfortable enough. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room with a view of the gardens I had once planned and planted. But it felt like exile, like being put out to pasture. Every morning I would wake up and see the main house, the house where I had lived as a wife and mother, where Sarah now lived as the head of the family. Some days I would catch glimpses of her through the windows, moving through rooms that had once been mine, making decisions about a life that had once included me. I want to pause here and ask you something. I know some of you watching this understand exactly what I'm talking about, that feeling of being erased from your own life, of watching everything you thought was yours slip away. Tell me in the comments below where you're watching from, what city, what country. I want to know that my story is reaching people who understand that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. The breaking point came 8 months after Richard's death. Sarah had been dating Michael Chen for about a year, a nice enough young man, a corporate lawyer with good prospects and impeccable manners. When she brought him to Sunday dinner and announced their engagement, I felt something close to happiness for the first time since Richard's funeral. Finally, I thought, a chance to be included, to help plan a wedding, to feel like a mother again. But Sarah had other plans. "Mum," she said, twisting the new diamond ring on her finger, "Michael and I want to have a small ceremony, just immediate family and a few close friends. We're thinking the country club, maybe 50 people maximum." She paused, not meeting my eyes. "And we'd like to pay for everything ourselves. It's important to us to start our marriage independently." Translation: your input is not wanted, your involvement is not needed, your presence is barely tolerated. The wedding was beautiful, I'll admit that. Sarah looked radiant in a simple silk gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Michael beamed as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The country club had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, with white roses and twinkling lights, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. I sat at a table near the back. making small talk with distant relatives and trying to smile while my heart broke into smaller and smaller pieces. But it was during the reception that I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I was returning from the ladies' room when I heard voices coming from the coat room, Sarah's voice and Catherine's, unmistakable even though Richard's mother was supposedly too frail to attend the wedding. "She's finally out of the way," Catherine was saying. Richard was too soft-hearted to do what needed to be done while he was alive, but at least he had the sense to arrange things properly in his will. "I still feel bad about Mom," Sarah replied. "She seems so lost." Catherine's laugh was like ice-breaking. "She was always lost, dear. She never belonged in this family, and now she's exactly where she should have been all along, grateful for what little she's given and out of important decisions. Your father made sure she'll be comfortable, but not influential. There's a difference. The prenup was that comprehensive. Oh, my dear child, the prenup was just the beginning. Your father spent years making sure that woman could never touch the real family assets. Every important holding is in trusts she can't access. Every major decision requires approval she'll never get. She can live in her little cottage and receive her little allowance and think whatever she wants to think. But she'll never have any real power over this family's future." I stood frozen in the hallway, champagne glass trembling in my hand, as the full scope of my situation finally became clear. It wasn't just that Richard had left me a small inheritance. He had actively worked to ensure I would never have any meaningful control over anything that mattered. The guest house wasn't a gift, it was a cage. The monthly stipend wasn't generosity, it was a leash. And Sarah, my daughter, the child I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, was not only aware of this arrangement, she was complicit in it. She felt bad about my situation, the way someone might feel bad about having to put down a beloved but inconvenient pet. That night, alone in my little cottage with the sounds of celebration drifting across the gardens from the main house, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. If Richard thought he could control me from beyond the grave, if Catherine thought she had finally won our decades-long war, if Sarah thought she could treat me like a harmless old woman to be managed and contained, they were all about to learn exactly how wrong they were. I was going to fight back, not with tears or pleading or emotional manipulation, but with the same cold calculation they had used against me. I was going to find every legal loophole, every technicality, every weakness in their carefully constructed plan, and I was going to take back what should have been mine from the beginning. The first step was information. I spent the next 3 weeks going through every document in Richard's home office, every file cabinet, every drawer. Sarah had moved into the master suite, but hadn't bothered to clear out Richard's papers, probably assuming I was too broken and defeated to cause any real trouble. What I found in those files was a roadmap to 28 years of financial manoeuvring designed specifically to keep me powerless. But I also found something else: inconsistencies. Small ones at first. Dates that didn't quite match, signatures that looked slightly different, transfers that seemed to violate the terms of certain trusts. Richard had been meticulous in his planning, but he had also been human, and humans make mistakes. The second step was hiring my own attorney. Not James Morrison, who had clearly been part of Richard's strategy from the beginning, but someone with no loyalty to the Whitmore family name. I found Patricia Huang through a recommendation from the wife of one of Richard's former business rivals, a woman who had her own reasons to dislike my late husband. Patricia was young, hungry, and specialised in exactly the kind of complex financial litigation I needed. "Mrs. Whitmore," Patricia said during our first meeting, "I want to be clear about what you're considering here. Challenging a will of this magnitude, especially one that appears to have been carefully structured by experienced attorneys, is going to be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally brutal. Your daughter will likely view this as a betrayal, your extended family will take sides, and there's no guarantee of success." "I understand," I told her. "But I need you to understand something too. I have been systematically excluded from my own life for the past 28 years. My husband, his mother, and now my daughter have made it clear that they consider me a burden to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I have $5,000 a month and a small house, which means I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain." Patricia smiled then, not the polite, professional smile she had been wearing, but something sharper, more predatory. "In that case, let's see what we can do." The investigation that followed was like archaeological work, digging through layers of financial history to uncover the truth beneath. Patricia brought in forensic accountants, handwriting experts, and investigators who specialised in complex estate fraud. We discovered that several of the trust modifications Richard had made in the final years of his life had been backdated. We found evidence that Catherine had influenced Richard to change certain provisions while he was on medication, following a minor surgery in 2018. Most importantly, we discovered that the prenuptial agreement I had signed in 1995 had been altered after the fact, with signatures forged and dates changed. But the real breakthrough came when we started investigating Richard's business practices more closely. The Whitmore textile empire was not quite as solid as it appeared. Richard had been engaging in some creative accounting to hide significant losses from a failed expansion into overseas manufacturing. Money had been moved between various family trusts and business accounts in ways that violated both the terms of those trusts and several federal financial regulations. More damaging still, we discovered that Sarah had been aware of these irregularities for over a year before Richard's death. She had not only failed to report them to the appropriate authorities, she had actively participated in moving money to hide the full extent of the losses. In her eagerness to protect her inheritance, she had made herself vulnerable to charges of financial fraud. The legal battle that followed consumed the better part of 2 years. Court dates became the rhythm of my life, depositions where I had to relive every slight and humiliation of my marriage, hearings where teams of attorneys argued over the meaning of documents older than Sarah herself, appeals and counter-appeals that drag the family name through headlines in the financial press. Sarah fought back with everything she had. She hired 3 separate law firms, including the most expensive white-collar defense attorney in the state. She launched her own investigation into my activities, looking for any evidence of gold-digging or manipulation that might discredit my claims. She even had me followed by private investigators, hoping to find something scandalous in my quiet, solitary life. But perhaps most painfully, she tried to use our relationship as a weapon. She would call me crying, begging me to drop the lawsuit for the sake of our family. She sent cards on my birthday and Mother's Day, with handwritten notes about how much she loved me, and how sorry she was that things had gotten so complicated. She invited me to holiday dinners, where she would seat me at the head of the table and make toasts about the importance of family unity, all while her attorneys worked to destroy my case behind the scenes. The media attention was relentless. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the Whitmore War, complete with unflattering photographs of me leaving the courthouse and speculation about my motives. Society columnists who had once fawned over my dinner parties now wrote snide pieces about greedy widows and family loyalty. I received anonymous letters calling me everything from a gold digger to a vindictive witch, and more than once I found reporters camped outside the guest house, hoping to catch me in an unguarded moment. Through it all, I held on to the cold fury that had sustained me since that night at Sarah's wedding. Every humiliation, every setback, every moment when I questioned whether the fight was worth it, I remembered the sound of Catherine's laughter and Sarah's casual dismissal of my pain. I remembered 28 years of being treated like an inconvenience, and I found the strength to keep going. The trial itself was a circus. The courthouse was packed with reporters, curious spectators, and members of the social circles that had once been my world. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through decades of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. Patricia had prepared me well, but nothing could have prepared me for the experience of laying bare the most painful moments of my life in front of strangers. Sarah's testimony was masterful. She cried at all the right moments, spoke about her love for her father, and her concern for my mental health following his death. She painted a picture of a devoted daughter, trying to honour her father's wishes, while caring for an increasingly unstable mother. When the prosecutor asked her directly about the forged signatures and backdated documents, she claimed complete ignorance, suggesting that any irregularities were either the result of clerical errors or actions taken by her father without her knowledge. But Patricia had saved our best evidence for last. On the final day of testimony, she presented the jury with audio recordings that our investigators had uncovered, conversations between Richard and Catherine from 2019, discussing in explicit detail how they planned to modify various trust documents to ensure I would never have access to the family's real wealth. The recordings had been made by Richard himself, apparently as insurance against Catherine's sometimes impulsive decision-making, and they had been stored on a forgotten backup drive in his office computer. In those recordings, you could hear them laughing about my pathetic attempts to fit in and discussing the best ways to keep Margaret manageable after Richard's death. Most damning of all, there was a conversation where Catherine explicitly instructed Richard on how to forge my signature on certain documents, and another where they discussed bringing Sarah into their planning. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with their verdict, I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. Guilty on multiple counts of estate fraud, forgery and conspiracy. The judge ordered that Richard's will be set aside and that his estate be redistributed according to the state's intestacy laws, which meant I was entitled to half of everything. But the victory felt hollow in ways I hadn't expected. Sarah was facing potential criminal charges for her role in the cover-up, though she ultimately negotiated a plea deal that involved significant financial penalties and community service. The family business had to be sold to pay legal fees and back taxes, ending a legacy that had lasted 4 generations. The main house, the symbol of everything I had once wanted to be part of, was purchased by developers who turned it into luxury condominiums. I got my money, more money than I had ever dreamed of having. Enough to travel anywhere, buy anything, live however I wanted for the rest of my life. But the cost of that victory was everything else. Sarah and I haven't spoken since the day the verdict was announced. She moved to California with Michael, and I hear through mutual acquaintances that they're expecting their first child, my first grandchild, who will grow up never knowing me. The social world that had once defined my existence had completely rejected me. I was persona non grata at every club, every charity, every gathering that had once been central to my identity. The few friends who remained were those who had been equally damaged by their own battles with the establishment, and our conversations were bitter affairs where we compared wounds and traded gossip about who had fallen from grace most spectacularly. I bought a penthouse apartment in the city, filled it with beautiful things, and discovered that luxury without love is just expensive loneliness. I travel constantly now. Paris, London, Tokyo, anywhere that doesn't remind me of the life I destroyed in order to save my dignity. I eat at the finest restaurants and stay at the most exclusive hotels, but I eat alone and sleep alone and wake up each morning with the knowledge that I won a war nobody should have had to fight. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder what would have happened if I had simply accepted Richard's final judgment, if I had learned to be content with my small house and my small allowance and my small place in a family that had never really wanted me. Would Sarah and I still have our Sunday dinners? Would I be helping plan birthday parties for grandchildren who might look at me with love instead of fear? But then I remember that conversation at the wedding, the casual cruelty in their voices as they discussed my future, as if I were a piece of furniture to be stored in the basement. I remember 28 years of being told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that I didn't matter, that my feelings didn't count, that my presence was something to be endured rather than celebrated, and I know I made the only choice I could live with. I chose to fight back against people who had spent decades trying to make me disappear. I chose to demand recognition of my worth, even if that recognition came in the form of legal judgment rather than love. I chose to refuse the role of grateful victim they had written for me. The money sits in my accounts, earning interest, growing larger every month. I donate generously to charities now, women's shelters, legal aid societies, organisations that help people who have been discarded by the systems that were supposed to protect them. It's a form of penance, I suppose, though I'm not entirely sure what I'm atoning for. Some nights, when the penthouse feels too quiet and the city lights seem cold and distant, I take out my phone and start to dial Sarah's number. I imagine what I would say if she answered. I would tell her that I'm sorry the family had to be destroyed in order for me to find my place in it. I would tell her that I never wanted to hurt her, only to stop being hurt myself. I would tell her that I love her and miss her, and that money is a poor substitute for the daughter I lost in the process of finding my self-respect. But I never make those calls, because I know what her response would be. The same polite distance she learned from her grandmother, the same emotional unavailability she inherited from her father. Sarah would listen to my apologies and my explanations, and then she would thank me for calling and tell me she hopes I'm doing well, and we would both pretend that civility is the same thing as forgiveness, So I continue to live with the consequences of my choices, just as Sarah lives with hers. The family fortune is gone, scattered to lawyers and accountants and tax authorities. The family name is tarnished, associated now with scandal rather than success. The family itself is broken beyond repair, its members scattered across the country like seeds from a dead flower. I have become exactly what Catherine always accused me of being, a woman who married into wealth and then destroyed it when I didn't get my way. The irony is not lost on me that in fighting to prove I belonged in the Whitmore family, I ended up eliminating the Whitmore family entirely, but I also became something Catherine never expected me to be, a woman who refused to disappear quietly, who demanded to be seen and heard and reckoned with. I may have lost my daughter and my social standing, and any hope of the peaceful old age I once imagined, but I kept my dignity. And some days that feels like enough. Other days, it feels like the loneliest victory in the world. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, if you've listened to the confession of a woman who chose revenge over reconciliation, I want you to do something for me. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because stories like mine need to be told, not because they're noble or inspiring, but because they're true. Because they show what happens when people who are supposed to love each other treat love like a commodity to be rationed and controlled. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if Sarah will ever call, if her child will ever know my name, if there's any way back from the choices I made in my moment of absolute desperation. What I know is that I am no longer invisible, no longer powerless, no longer willing to accept crumbs from a table I helped set. And maybe, in the end, that's the only victory that really matters.